So, welcome to the activity 3 of our podcast today. Today we have 6 very experienced podcasters who are reflecting on their feelings toward podcasts. Having done 2 podcasts and listened to various others, we would like to get their input on what they feel about podcast is and, what's the general trend for future in the art of podcasting and possibly how can we apply podcasting in education background. So I guess we'll start with Aaron. How do you feel about what do you feel about doing podcasts? What's the general idea about it?
I've had a lot of fun doing the podcasts with everyone. I think it's one of the first things is I think it's challenging to do it in different time zones across different continents and kind of recording it like this. I'm sure we don't get the best quality. I'm sure there's a little delay, which kind of inhibits, I think, good conversation. And also I feel like right now, as we're being recorded, we kind of alter ourselves in the way we speak. So it's kind of challenging, I think, to break through those technological walls and try to get to a real conversation. But I think we've managed to do that from time to time, and I've really enjoyed the experience. So overall, never really tried to do it myself, but the first time here that I've done it, loved it. Thank you.
How about Alexis, coming from a more education curriculum design point of view, how do you feel about podcasts and doing podcasting?
I think from this group, the one thing I have learned more than anything is it's so subjective how podcasts are used and what people think of them. I came into this project thinking, I'd be able to come up with a strategy to bring back to my workplace where I'd be able to implement, maybe a course that is primarily podcast driven, or I'd have new ways of bringing podcasts into our current development and the way our course is already run. And I still feel like it has to be a case-by-case basis. And I think I've really learned that just from collaborating with my team, that really there's no cut and dry answer. It's very important that we are thinking about specific cases and specific development. And I mean, maybe I should have known that from the start, because that's how instructional design is. It's very subjective to your audience and who's going to be using it. But I think more than anything, podcasts are like that. And I have enjoyed the experience of working with this group. I think we've proven that, maybe our audio is not perfect and our script isn't perfect and everything like that, but many of us are on different continents, and just the ability to be able to record a podcast with 6 people online is amazing. And I think it shows that there's way more capability with this medium than maybe any of us imagined before doing this project.
Thank you, Alexis. How about you, Joyce, as a secondary English literature teacher? How do you feel about podcasting?
So I would have to agree with a lot of what Alexis said. And I also wanted to point out that when we looked at why we liked the podcasts that we do listen to, we what makes a good podcast, we talked about the ones that are interest driven, right? So people who have a shared interest and then want to include other people in that community. So I had always used podcasts as student productions, and then kind of, created the groups and then gave them the thing that they needed to be interested in. But now, having participated in one where sort of I was given a group and, told to be part of it and assessed on it, I can see that it can be more challenging to be interest driven and to see sort of like the positives of it. But I feel very, very lucky, because I think that our group really gelled very well together. And so that it was really like a nice flow to the podcast. And the other thing I just wanted to point out was, for my personal experience, was the difference between the free banter or the free response kind of free-flowing podcast that we did and the moderated one. And that I thought, so I was originally one of the ones that said, maybe we should go for a banter style and be a little bit more free and open in our conversation, because we do gel so well together. But then as soon as the recording was on, we kind of we actually kind of hampered ourselves a little bit, and it didn't feel as natural. So I think that the moderated method is probably better for something like this with so many people.
Thank you, Joyce. How about you, Mumita, from another instructional designer? How do you feel about podcasting, and how do you feel about being in a podcast?
Thank you, Edric. And I would wholly agree with whatever Joyce, Alexis, and Aaron has shared with all of us. Firstly, I had a lot of fun doing this experience of podcast with all of you. So really, really cherished the experience. I was probably the least experienced with podcast when I joined this group. I had never really heard or used podcast before, but in the course of this project, I got introduced to a totally new medium of, medium that can be explored in education, based on experiences I heard from Aaron and Joyce, and you, Edric, and that how you guys have implemented podcasting into your educational front. That has given me a lot of exposure, and I'll definitely consider including this medium in my corporate learning, um, uh, things that I create in the future. So yes, there are challenges recording the podcast, like everybody said here, since we are separated geographically, time zone, and operating out of so many devices instead of just one, recording studio. But it was nonetheless, I think we managed to do pretty well, and this will definitely be something that I will be exploring while creating my new courses.
Thank you, Mumita. Lastly, how about you, Paul? How do you feel about doing a podcast? Were you nervous? Were you happy? How do you feel, Paul?
Edric?
Sorry, Paul. Sorry. How are you? So, lastly, how about you, Paul? How do you feel about podcasting?
Podcasting. Well, I thought that this the creation of this these 3 episodes or last 2 episodes of this podcast was a pretty good experience. I I think that I have to agree with the rest of you about the subjectivity of podcasts, and the big problem about having this asynchronous was definitely a challenge, but it was a sacrifice that we all took, and it turned out great. One challenge that I have to agree with Mamita about, challenge, like, I don't know too much about podcasts. I came to the group with not much knowledge. I've dabbled in listening to podcasts, but I haven't really created one or anything like that. So I didn't really have much to contribute. Like, not enough. I didn't have that many educational stories or used it in any educational context before. I haven't seen it being used in an educational context while I was doing substitute teaching. So I think that a big challenge of making a podcast is the prior knowledge in which the participants bring forward, and certainly that my prior knowledge was a lot like Momita's. I didn't really know too much about it. It was challenging, but at the same time, it went well, and I think that we did a good job.
All right. Thank you, Paul. I guess personally for myself as a host, podcasting has been fun, at the same time challenging, in the sense that I never realized when you are doing a podcast, you have to think of so many topics on the spot and constantly review what other people are saying, and then think about new topics to link the conversation along. Yeah, at the same time, it's pretty enjoyable because you can leave your footprint, in a sense, in some way, shape, or form for other people to follow. And so that's my personal feeling about this. These whole recording podcasts, and having interview with some of the best teammates that anyone can ever ask for. So right now, I just want to open the question to everyone around here. You know, basically, what do you think is the future? What is in the future for podcasts, and especially what is in the future for podcasts in education? So this is an open response. Anyone can feel free to answer.
I'll jump in, I guess. This is Alexis. I was chatting with the group earlier that I think one takeaway from this project is that when using podcasts in education, particularly in a face-to-face environment, we've concluded that it's best to use it almost as a secondary type of medium. So maybe you're in a classroom and you're playing a podcast in the background and you're drawing or you're writing while it's going, or anything, maybe another activities going on while it's playing, or kind of secondary, because as as society has advanced and moved forward in history, people have changed. We're not used to sitting around in a group listening to the radio anymore. Like, we need that stimulation visually, and we need to be doing something to kind of stay on task, to stay interested. So I think in a face-to-face environment, we would recommend doing it as a secondary. However, if you were to do more of a flipped learning, I think is what you call it, where you maybe go home at night and you listen to a podcast and then you come to class to talk about it, but you're not actually listening to it in class, then it could be more of a primary activity. So maybe you have it as a homework assignment, or maybe it's part of your reading, almost your weekly reading or your weekly, information gathering. It can be part of that as a primary, but then that's more of on your own, kind of a, in your house or in your car or when you're walking kind of activity, but it's not one that you're just going to sit in a classroom and do all together, because we found that it would just be really awkward if there was nothing else going on face to face.
Yeah. Yeah, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, that's. I think that's on point, and bringing up that issue about like the visuals. Just touching back on that, I think that a lack of visuals make podcasts pretty unappealing to youth, and like as students get older, who are used to that sort of thing, they'll take that sensibility with them into their adulthood. In another MET course, another ETech course that I took a while ago, we read a book called Writing Space, Computer Hypertext and Remediation Print. And the author, David Bolter, he essentially argued in one chapter that there was like this cultural battle between print and imagery. And the image was so compelling and provocative and like because it's so concise and informative, when it presented it effectively, I think a lot of youth sort of expect that visual element. So I would say that I don't see the growth of a podcast in educational settings that much for exactly that point.
Thank you, Paul. Was there anything you want to add on, Joyce?
Yeah, I think I agree with my work with secondary students as well. So, they really are used to that visual element, and it's interesting because the visual element doesn't necessarily have to even be of themselves. I mean, I'm thinking about like I think Edric, you talked about Twitch, and I my own children like to watch YouTubes of people playing video games all the time, right? So the visual is not the person themselves, but the content that they're talking about. So I think that really is an essential element for youth today if you're going to use it successfully in the classroom.
All right. I just want to maybe ask you guys for a further question. Maybe, how do you feel about, would podcasts maybe slowly transition out or slowly, disappear maybe in the next 5 to 10 years? This will be open question to anybody who wants to answer. So Aaron?
I'll take it. It's Aaron here. So I just want to maybe play a little devil's advocate to Paul's point, which is that maybe the lack of visuals makes it unappealing. One thing that I've learned doing this podcast is that I think what makes listening to this interesting is our personality, our ability to speak, the art of storytelling. I think this skill of talking and sounding interesting, I think is still going to be relevant. And what I've learned is the podcast is probably the most direct medium to receive that sort of auditory oral tradition. And I'm a really strong believer in storytelling and oral tradition. I think that's really what drives the heart of all mediums, including video, including text. There's the story at the heart of it. And I think through words is the most direct way that we as humans communicate that. So I don't think it'll ever go away, because I think that direct connection will always be necessary. It'll grow, I'm not sure, but I don't think we're facing extinction for podcasts.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Anybody want to add on to that point?
I agree. I don't think the question though was for me about whether or not they'd go extinct. It was just about, in my particular context, working with the groups of students that I do, could I see a future in it there? Back to what Alexis pointed out, and that it would be for flip learning, right? So they take it away, they listen to it, they come back, or they produce it. So I think in the production aspect, definitely the oral storytelling element would be really important. And I do think there's a revival of that, right? I think that's a really lost art, and but it needs to continue, absolutely. And this niche has to stay. Again, like you, I don't know if it's going to grow, but I do think there will always be a place for it.
All right. Thank you, Joyce. Paul, do you have anything you want to add as well?
I do, yeah. I think those are really, really good points, and yeah, the point taken, Aaron. I think I do see growth of podcasts because of the storytelling, the nature of storytelling within it. I think it may grow in a sort of like a self-selected education setting. So, for example, what like Vygotsky called spontaneous knowledge or informal outside schooling institution learning. It's I think its mobile potential can really make it appealing. Instead of say reading an ebook or something like that, or the storytelling within just print literature or something like that would maybe even more unappealing than just like a good speech delivery of a story. I think that's really powerful, and I could see podcasts perhaps being more influential in spontaneous knowledge and in more self-paced learning situations.
Very good point. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Paul. Mamita, would you like to add something?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add here that with the in future, whether podcasts will stay in as is form or not, that might be a little bit of question. Like, I'm not saying it will be extinct, but it will definitely evolve in many other ways, like instructional ways, like where you can hear a podcast, do a thing where it is providing instructions. And a lot of places it's already there, and it can also become some of the audible maps kind of thing, for example. I'm just extrapolating the concept of audio knowledge into other things which is already there. So yeah, so it's a very valid question if the podcasts will grow or not, whether it will become extinct or not. But it will definitely stick around. The art of storytelling will never go away. It'll definitely stick around. Maybe it will not as is, but it'll evolve into something much more, for fruitful and beautiful. That's my thought. Thanks.
Good point. Thank you, Mamita. And Alexis?
I was just going to throw a question out to the group that it makes me wonder, as this topic comes up of storytelling and preserving this audio tradition, this speaking tradition of stories, if almost as educators we have a responsibility to teach this type of medium. Like, I'm wondering, as educators, if we are somewhat responsible for maintaining this sort of medium and putting it to use, because without being educated on podcasts, like even many of us here in this group didn't know about podcasts that much before this project. I'm wondering, and I'll put it out to the group to answer as well, if you feel a certain responsibility. Otherwise, are we going to fall, victim to the big powers like Google and YouTube and, where videos are taking over and they're everywhere? Is it our responsibility as the underdogs to kind of save a type of presentation style and a type of sharing storytelling medium?
Yeah, I think that Paul and I could probably have a bit to add to this, being familiar and working with the British Columbia Ministry of Education curriculum. So there's a couple of aspects there. Is that BC's Ministry of Education is really actively working to incorporate not only Indigenous content, but Indigenous ways of knowing and learning. And that is definitely an emphasis and sort of a decolonization around the concept of visual or written text as the most important type of texts. And so, this auditory text is one that can be as valid, or if not more valid, than the ones that are being presented on a more regular basis. The concern is that with traditional oral storytelling, it isn't fixed, and that was one of the reasons why probably it didn't. It was quite easy to quash at times in history, and that podcasts do fix it to an extent. So that's a concern there. And then the other aspect of the BC Ministry of Education curriculum is a real focus on core competencies and social emotional learning. So I think this speaks to what Aaron was saying about, we do need to know how to speak to each other. We do need to know how to carry voice and style and personality in the words we say, strictly in an oral sense, and like both ORAL and AURAL, right? We need both of those to function successfully. And there's a lot of research that backs up the fact of just this text-based, heads down, eyes on the screen kind of culture that we're creating or contributing to is actually leading to quite a lot of social emotional stress, right, and isolation. So I think, as for sure for me, I don't know how Paul feels about working with the curriculum as well, and working with young people, it is a drive, right? Like, those are things that we do need to be conscious of, and this is another way that I know that I can promote those aspects.
Thank you, Joyce. Paul, do you have anything you want to add on?
No, that more or less that hits the nail on the head right there.
Okay, so I will close up. I guess thank you for everyone for participating in the podcast. Thank you, Paul, Momita, Joyce, Alexis, and Aaron for giving us their experience and their insight into podcasting. This is Edric Lin, your host for podcast 565M. I hope you guys enjoyed a good podcast about podcasting, and have fun and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. See you later. Bye.